There's a lot of talk of the U.S. establishing Bitcoin as a national strategic reserve of Bitcoin. So the U.S. government's going to start stockpiling Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoiners have been talking about this for a long time. I know when I first got into it, just was laughed at by people that are, traditional finance, quote unquote, smart money, like literally laughed at in my face with the thought that, I would say, oh, well, due to game theory, governments will eventually realize they have to adopt this thing. Central banks will adopt this thing, even if they philosophically despise it. You have to acquire some because it's an existential threat to your business, right? So you have to buy some of it as a hedge. And this was basically the argument we've been making, we as in Bitcoiners, since 2000. Well, I got involved in 16, 17. People have probably been making it before that, but that was the course of action we saw it taking due to game theory. Laughed at hysterically. Here we are 8 years later, 9 years later. Wow, 9 years later. And it's happening. It's happening in the global superpower, the United States. So what are we to think about the game theory playing out around nation state Bitcoin adoption? Is this the tipping point? Where are we in this game?
Grant, what do you think?
Yeah. I was trying to, I think that Lowry, so he has been sounding the horn or beating the drum or whatever in a long time for this strategic reserve. And he does think that if it's not us, then you fall behind absolutely in this asymmetric contest that is acquiring Bitcoin, the only scarce resource. It's
like the adoption of gunpowder, right?
Yeah.
You don't adopt it, you're going to get invaded by someone that did adopt it, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes to the notion that Bitcoin is bit power, that the proof of work protocol is what makes Bitcoin valuable, but the coins themselves, which Lowry calls bit power, these are physically, it was physically costly to create them, and it's physically costly to transmit them. So they have this unique property in cyberspace. So accumulating Bitcoin, even though his thesis is kind of mostly about proof of work, the reusable proof of work creation, the coin, the stamp, the receipt, that has value because Lowry, he gives the computer science analogy of the strangler vine pattern, where a new computer system will not often just entirely replace the old one in one swift go. It will slowly leach functionality from the legacy system. And so we can look at Bitcoin in that way. It's kind of right now leeching the financial functionality from the internet. But Lowry thinks more and more functionality is going to be leached from the internet. Bitcoin as bit power, these coins that are created, they're going to be used for other things in the future, such as they're provably costly, so you can use them to collateralize information that you want to get through to somebody else so that they know you're sending a real world signal and not some sort of spam attack. So I think part of the value of the strategic reserve from Lowry's perspective is not just that these things are scarce, they're going to appreciate monetary value, we want to win the financial war or whatever it is, which is important too, but also this could replace the architecture of the internet. And so having these Bitcoins or bit power, these things could have functionality, and indeed if the military secures a thoroughfare, then bit power could secure the thoroughfare of cyberspace, and through this paywall type functionality. And so we need to get it for that reason, for military purposes. And I think that type of argument is powerful because other people make the argument that, well, we have a gold reserve, but the gold doesn't back the dollar, and the Bitcoin it won't back the dollar either. So why do we need this? And is it just an attack on the dollar? And you can say, no, there is. If we understand it as bit power, if we take seriously what Lowry is saying, there is this other function that a strategic reserve could have to preserve our future access to the thoroughfare of cyberspace once it has become hyper Bitcoinized or Bitcoinized.
Yeah. So as there are more applications making use of the security functionality that Bitcoin imparts to internet applications, well, you'll need more and more Bitcoin, right? As there's more and more volume of activity occurring inside of these software applications. So it's really, I mean, it's a land grab, right? It's like you need to get as much of this territory as possible. You don't know, right? Like when you're taking land in Manhattan, you don't know that it's going to be skyscrapers 200 years in the future and, you know, the financial center of the world. You don't really know that, but you know that there's a very small piece of land that has good sea access and it's strong bedrock and like whatever the features are that make it attractive. And you just need to get as much of that as you possibly can, right? To preserve your interest. Do you think this is the tipping point? Like, do you think that the United States, if let's assume that the United States does go through with this, it's not certain yet, that they do start to stockpile Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset. Do you think that is the tipping point for broader nation state adoption?
What do you think, Lucas?
I do. I absolutely do, because we're seeing it in other countries right now that, as Saylor would say, they have a need to know. And they have a need to know because they have suffered under the tyranny of the dollar for so long that they are open to new ideas. And I did not originally, I mean, when you first learn about Bitcoin, you understand Bitcoin through the lens of the dollar, and what that makes you immediately want to do is oil your guns and stock up on ammunition because we're going to war. Like I had this burning, fervent anger towards the oppressors, and it took a systems engineer approach to back that off and to understand that evil is not necessarily inherent within the people who run the system. It is the system that creates the evil. That James Clear in Atomic Habits says that we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. Mm-hmm. And I've never seen anyone consistently maintain good habits in a bad environment.
Right.
And so it is perfectly explainable how this happened. And that left me at this crossroads where I really was not too excited about my government, which had been so oppressive and tyrannical, owning the thing that gives so much power. Mm-hmm. And I got to credit Jason Lowry for bringing me around on this, because when I asked him about this, he said, who do you want to have it? Mm. You know, war is not like you don't see communist countries fighting each other. You mm-hmm. don't see capitalist countries fighting each other. War is always a battle between ideologies. Mm-hmm. And so do I want my ideology, which started out to be, it started out in a good way.
Yeah.
Do I want that to persist, or do I want something else? Okay, so that brought me around. But then to the point of, is it time for the United States to step aside, to abandon the dollar, to recognize the sunk cost fallacy? Then two things I would say about that is, when Google realized that they could not compete with Apple for the iOS ecosystem, what'd they do? They bought Android and they open sourced it. Mm-hmm. And they weren't in that dominant position, mm-hmm. but now 80% of the world runs on Android as a result, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing is, this is how I try to explain to myself what Michael Saylor is doing with MicroStrategy, which is that I liken it to Blockbuster and Netflix. Everybody knows this story. Everybody knows that Netflix went to Blockbuster and said, hey, we have this new thing. And Blockbuster said, pound sand. Mm-hmm. And then 2 years later, the only thing that's left is one of the funniest accounts on X, which is The Last Blockbuster, which is a great follow. And they're just completely gone. But the second part of that story is never told. The second part of that story is that Netflix creates this new domain, which is digital video, and they own that. They own that entire market for a very small time. Mm-hmm. And from the second that they take over that market, they lose peak market share. And they continue to lose peak market share. Amazon comes in, Disney Plus, Hulu, ESPN, et cetera. And they just continue to take market share, because that is a pie. And new entrants into that pie take pieces of it. Mm-hmm. That pie doesn't grow. The difference with Bitcoin is that, and Saylor's strategy is that if you adopt his strategy and copy it and do the exact same thing, then you help him. If you don't adopt his strategy and you don't copy it and you stay out of it, you help him. It doesn't matter. It wins both ways, and the difference is the digital scarcity that's enforced by proof of work and the timestamp and the hash. We're able to have the pie that is no longer me taking from you. It's no longer us competing for market share. That pie grows. And so that's, I'm really excited about what happens in the future because it aligns incentives for the first time. It gives the money back to the people so that when the government wants it, they have to do something worth getting paid.
Right.
Right?
They have to render a useful, valuable service at a consensual price point, right?
Yep. We have a market for government now.
Yes, yeah. It pushes centralized government into a free market style competition. And I think it's an excellent point you bring up. Like the neutrality of a global digital non-state sound money is probably the most brilliant alignment of incentives we've ever had, right? Because finally you have the rules without rulers, so to speak. And then every business that's successful in bringing a product or service to market that solves problems for consumers better, faster, cheaper, everyone worldwide, I don't need to know any of them, increases the purchasing power of my money. So you're now aligned with everyone in a way. Like even if you're competing with them directly, like obviously if you're Blockbuster versus Netflix, you want to prevail, right? You want to win. But even if you don't, and they brought something to market that's radically increasing productivity or, solving problems better, faster, cheaper, if you've got Bitcoin on the balance sheet, you still win, even if you go out of business. So there's this very potent alignment of incentives between all market actors, from individuals to businesses to nation states, that I do think is underappreciated. And we don't know, like it's an unknown. We've never had, like you could look at the gold standard as like, and again, gold has all these problems with it being an invitation to violence and whatnot. But the glimmers of the gold standard and the alignment we had is probably the closest thing we've had to that, to this bright orange future that we're speculating about. But I really believe it's underappreciated. Like, what do you do when consumer preference becomes sovereign in the world? And it's no longer about might makes right, or it's less about might makes right. I guess you're still going to have that physical backstopping of violence is somewhere in the background, but when it doesn't pay and it's not profitable, people just aren't going to engage in it as much. It's just going to be more profitable to do things people value, right?
Yeah, Lowry refers to this as the infinitely prosperous organism that within an evolutionary framework with Bitcoin, we've reached the point, usually an organism, once it has a certain amount of resources accumulated, that's its prosperity margin, it has to scale up its cost of attack or it's going to be devoured, consumed by predators. So Bitcoin is the first instance where that prosperity margin scales along with the cost of attack. It's up and to the right together. And so it is unprecedented and a new evolutionary strategy technology that allows infinite prosperous scaling cooperatively, competitively.
Yeah, the rough metaphor I've used in the past is like, imagine if you had a safe and the more money you put in the safe, like the bigger and harder to crack that safe became. That's basically what Bitcoin is, right? The more purchasing power is stored on the network, the more secure the network becomes. That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's like...
And the more attempts to brute force that safe, the stronger it gets.
Yes. Yeah, it's anti-fragile.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.